Hi again, everyone, and welcome back to U.S. History with Mr. Snyder. And today we are going to discuss and finish up our discussion about World War II with the effects of World War II on... So it's a turning point in human history that changes the United States and the world in many, many ways. Many Americans come home determined to continue spreading democracy and freedom here at home, and making sure everyone has equality as well as abroad. In addition, the United States emerges from the war prepared to lead an interventionist policy and not stay isolationists anymore, and we are ready to take on the complex and vital role in world affairs that we still hold today. So going on about different things that lead up to the end of the war, in February 1945, we know we're going to win the war eventually. It just depends where. So Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, the big three, meet in Yalta on the Black Sea to discuss the final war strategy. The major thing that is decided here is that Poland, Bulgaria, and Romania, the countries in Eastern Europe, would hold free elections. But Stalin later takes back this promise once he has control of these countries and basically makes them his subordinates. In July of 1945, Germany has been taken over, Germany has surrendered, and so they meet, the big three, in the Potsdam, Germany, a suburb of Berlin. But Truman has replaced Roosevelt, and Churchill is there at the meeting, but he is replaced as prime minister during the conference, and of course Stalin is still in charge of Russia. So the thing that they decide here at Potsdam is that they're going to divide Germany into 4 occupied zones, which you can see here. The French, the British, the U.S., and the Soviet zones. They would also decide that Poland gets new borders and moves further west, and Stalin promises to enter the war against Japan eventually, and they do on August 9th, the same day that we dropped the bomb on Nagasaki. Eventually, the 3 Western powers, the French, British, and U.S., will combine their zones to create the country of West Germany, and the East German sector, the Soviet sector, will be known as East Germany. And you can see here Berlin, even though it is divided in, even though it's entirely in the middle of East Germany, it is divided in the same way. Each sector, each country has its own little sector of Berlin. So West Berlin, even though it's in East Germany, is the capital of West Germany. We'll talk more about that later. So things that have changed. There's new countries and new boundaries for current countries in Europe. Many Eastern European nations in the next few years will come under Soviet control and become satellite states of the Soviet Union. And communist and non-communist interests will clash in a period in U.S. history known as the Cold War, from 1945 until 1991, when the Soviet Union, spoiler alert, dissolves and is no longer a country. In China, the civil war that they were having in the 1930s resumes between nationalists and communists. MacArthur occupies Japan with the U.S. military, and he supervises the writing of a new constitution in Japan that abolishes the Japanese military. So no military in Japan, very controversial today. It also marks the end of the imperialism of the East by the West. Germany and Japan's aggressive actions toward other countries underscore the abuse of imperialism that has happened in the past 200, 300 years. So colonial peoples in Africa and Asia renew their drive for independence, especially people in the East Indies, Indochina, which is Vietnam, which is how we'll get into the Vietnam War soon, India from British, Burma from the British, the African colonies, and the Middle East all want to be independent. And over the next 50 years, most of them will achieve that. The Soviet Union and the United States emerge as the 2 superpowers after World War II. France has been obliterated. Britain has been obliterated. They need to rebuild. So the U.S. is clearly the strongest country in the world because no battle took place in the United States, unless you count the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Soviets lose millions millions of their own citizens, lots of civilians too, and their resources fighting the war. So the Soviets, even though they are not the stronger of the two countries, they have more control over Eastern Europe. Americans take on their new leadership role, and they want to help the world economy. So they establish what is known as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which are still around today, to oversee the world's finances and give advice on how they can improve it. They also hand out loans to impoverished nations. They bail out Greece and other countries that aren't able to meet their debts. So those are around today to prevent any economic disasters. They also passed the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or the GATT, which expands world trade by reducing tariffs or taxes on imports. Taxes or tariffs go from about 40% to about 5%. This causes some U.S. industries harm by losing out to competition from foreign competitors, but overall it did increase world trade. After World War II, we also established the United Nations, which is kind of like the League of Nations Part 2. They hope to mediate world conflicts to avoid war, and 50 nations meet in San Francisco in 1945 to sign the charter, but its permanent home today is in New York City, and you can visit the United Nations and see all the flags outside. So it's based here in America, and it hopes to mediate world conflicts to avoid war. The United Nations did issue the Universal Declaration of Rights, which was rights that it believed that all people had, which condemns forms of slavery and torture. It upholds the freedom of speech and religion for all people and maintain a minimum standard of living for all people around the world. It proves very difficult to enforce, however, so a lot of United Nations things prove difficult to enforce. And all nations are not equal in the United Nations. It's basically the World War II Allied powers, the winners, have the permanent seats on the UN Security Council, which is the most powerful part of it. So the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and Soviet Union, now Russia, all have permanent seats on the Security Council. So we also want to punish the Axis powers and the people who violate international law and the Geneva Conventions, which were signed in the 1930s, stating worldwide minimum treatment of prisoners of war and war crimes. So basically the Allies are the ones who try the Japanese for the atrocities in Asia. Tojo accepts his punishment and is sentenced to death. The Nuremberg trials were the ones that Americans were most interested in because these brought out the atrocities that the Nazis committed, and they try lots of Hitler's underlings who just said they were doing Hitler's orders, but then they still have to answer for their crimes. Most are hanged or received long prison terms. Every couple of years still you'll see a Nazi be arrested somewhere in the world, sometimes even in the United States. A Nazi will be arrested and then extradited back to Germany to face his war crimes. So the impact of the World War II on the United States itself, Americans have normally just thought to themselves, we're surrounded by two oceans, but now we begin to think globally. People know where these places are now, where Americans fought in Europe and Africa and Asia. They know all these places. So they begin to assume world leadership. World War II officially brings an end to the Great Depression and begins a period of economic prosperity in the 1950s, the likes of which we have never seen. The war moves people and money south to get new jobs, and that population trend continues to this day. And there's a greater government influence in economic affairs because of World War II, because of the OPA doing the price controls and the collection of raw materials and saying these contracts are taken care of first. And basically the government is now involved in the economy more than it ever has been. And lastly, African Americans have a new sense for the civil rights that they are fighting for, and they renew their fight for civil rights. White Americans at home also begin to call on the equality for everybody, and that America can finally become a true democracy. We'll get into the 1950s, which is the beginning of the civil rights movement, which leads into the 1960s. But it all starts in World War II. That's where they get their sense of fighting from. So that is all I have for you today. Make sure you fill out those learning targets completely. Bring any questions you have back to class, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.